Is Michael Burnham a Mary Sue? Yes. Kinda-ish. Allow me to explain. Since she first appeared on screen in 2017's Star Trek Discovery, Michael Burnham has been accused by a large portion of the Trek fandom as being a Mary Sue. Depending on who you ask, Michael comes across as a textbook example of someone from the Sue family, while others feel that response is unfair and that her flaws depicted on screen are enough to keep her away from that label. This disagreement between Trekkies is a battle that is still waging on to this day. To properly support my position of, yes kinda, for Michael, I'm going to share the history of Mary Sues, talk about the evolution of this archetype throughout the years, and then compare this definition to two of the main Star Trek characters that are commonly associated with the Sue family, Michael Burnham and Wesley Crusher. The Sue family, commonly referred to either Mary or Gary, depending on the character, is an idealized and seemingly perfect fictional character that is the center of a story's universe, usually succeeds at almost everything they set out to do, and bends the will of other characters, plot, and environments to focus almost exclusively on them. It's a character trope that has existed since humans could put pen to paper, and is most often attributed to an author's wish fulfillment that usually is some kind of representation of the author themselves within their own story. The origin of the Sue family has had a long familial connection with the Trek universe, as it made its first official debut in a short written by Paula Smith for the Trek magazine Menagerie in 1973. While some have attempted to blame the origin of this archetype on Smith, she actually wasn't responsible for it at all. She just gave it a name. Her story, A Trekkie's Tale, was written to parody what Smith viewed as a common practice with young female authors to perhaps subconsciously write an idealized version of themselves into a story and fail to write the original Star Trek characters accurately as a result of interacting with this unrealistic wish fulfillment figure. Because the character and story trope continued to crop up in fan fiction submissions, Smith and the other editors began referring to them as Lieutenant Mary Sue stories, and the term Mary Sue quickly caught on. So what is a Sue character? Well, a story with a Sue at its core is written as though the Sue is at the center of the universe, and we as the audience are supposed to accept that at face value, that they are the most interesting, most important, and most talented character in the story right from the start.
And be the greatest, most interesting, most important person of all times. All of this is true because it rhymes.
Take A Trekkie's Tale, for example. Lieutenant Mary Sue is, at 15 years old, the youngest lieutenant in Starfleet history. A female in a command position, which was a no-go for executives back then, has Captain Kirk fall in love with her, Spock admiring her superior intellect, so much so that he doesn't question the teenager sitting in the captain's position, saves the crew on an away mission, reveals her half-Vulcan heritage to Spock, receives the Nobel Peace Prize and Vulcan Order of Gallantry for running the Enterprise so effectively on her own, and then dies tragically with Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Mr. Scott all weeping at her bedside, who in turn mark Mary Sue's birthday as a national holiday aboard the Enterprise for all time. All of that happened in 5 paragraphs. Now, this is a very extreme example of a Sue character, and was clearly written to include all of the major tropes the fanfiction writers were sending in to get published. And I believe that because this original definition of the Sue archetype is so overwhelming, some people do not feel that Michael Burnham or Wesley Crusher would fall into this category. But this was 46 years ago, and over time, words, phrases, and labels change meaning and are used in different ways. So now we need to understand the modern version of what a Sue character is. You would be hard-pressed to find a character that is as extreme as Lieutenant Mary Sue inside of any official production in this day and age. Today's modern audiences are much more aware of the generic character and are prone to immediately reject it at face value. So, authors and writers now include the character in more subtle ways, going as far as to use different types of shred-outs of the Sue character, such as Einstein Sue, who is impossibly intelligent, or Mary Zoo, who is a badass fighter, or Jerk Sue, who lashes out at everyone but still is loved by all those around them, and even Sympathetic Sue, a character whose primary function is to incur the sympathy of the audience and fellow characters. Now you might be wondering at this point, if a main character portrays any extreme characteristic like the ones I just listed, does that automatically make them a Sue? Well, no. That's only one ingredient needed for this very complex recipe. There is another key ingredient that is fundamental to a character becoming a Sue, and it transcends race, gender, or age, and that is A Sue character is the center of attention, so much so that other characters, the story, the plot, and everything else begin to bend around their will to ensure the focus is on them. This is a fundamental issue when it comes to writing these characters, and the most important point that can be made. Having a main character or hero as the focus of your story is more than doable. The character crosses over into the Sue family line when they are placed above everything and everyone else seen on screen. Before we get into whether or not Micheal or Wesley fit into this description, let's talk about the positive example on how to portray an all-powerful character without it crossing into Sue territory, and that is 2017's Wonder Woman.
Possibly fight in this.
Princess Diana is an all-powerful character who is raised from birth to be a badass fighter and is literally a god within the DCEU. This sounds like a fast recipe for a disaster, right? She's got that main ingredient of the married Zoo warrior, but the writers of this film and really the entire comic storyline did a fantastic job avoiding the second key ingredient, which is that the universe doesn't bend to her will. The entire film is happening around Diana and her team with Steve Trevor. They are thrusted into the conflict of World War I and the struggles of human beings during that time period. Is she overpowered? Hell yes. But we also see her fail many times in the film, have her beliefs questioned by those around her, and doesn't bend the entirety of World War I to her desires. She's on a mission and helps people along the way, and is arguably a coming-of-age tale for Wonder Woman as a character within the DCEU. This point is perfectly exemplified in the climax of the film. Diana may have defeated Ares at the end of the movie, but her actions didn't end World War I, and Steve Trevor was there to sacrifice himself to stop the bioweapons from killing thousands of people. The story weaves into the presence of Wonder Woman, and things are still happening outside of her control or abilities, while also having a supporting cast that elevates the overall narrative instead of being tools to keep the focus on someone specific. This is the difference between being a hero of a story and being the center of that story's entire universe. I would now argue that the final ingredient of the Sue recipe is earning one's abilities and creating a connection with the audience. One of the biggest complaints about Rey from Star Wars is how much of a badass Force user she is, even better than Kylo Ren or Luke was when he was at this point in the hero's journey. And she's done it all without any training or guidance from Ghost Obi-Wan or Wacky Yoda. To me, this issue does fall under the Marriott Zoo shredout since it involves a character being a badass fighter. However, it's such a massive point of contention within pop culture these days that I felt it necessary to bring it up as its own ingredient. The biggest complaint here is that if a character has Sue-like qualities, the audience wants to see them earn it first through studying really hard or training to be a better fighter or whatever it is. Without a good training montage, people feel like the character is shallow and only there to be the best no matter what without having earned that title. So let's review. The full recipe for the Sue character includes one or more characteristic being in overdrive, such as physical strength, intelligence, or sympathy. The character is the center of the universe, and the writers bend or break everything else within the story to ensure the focus is on them. And finally, the abilities portrayed by the Sue are not shown or explained to the audience. Without the training montage, it's a lack of connection with the character. So, do these recipes add up into a wonderful Micheal Burnham souffle or a Wesley Crusher pie? Let's look at Wesley first. This first ingredient, in my mind, is a given. His entire character is built around his extreme intelligence. So for me, that's one. Now, for the second part, I think it's safe to say that it wasn't included in the Wesley Crusher pie. His actions and character are regulated to the background most of the time, and only has a few point-of-view episodes within the next generation. So for me, this is a no. The final ingredient, training, is tricky. Wesley is portrayed to be a boy genius from the start of the show without any concrete portrayal of how he got to that level. However, I feel like it's unfair to give him the full ingredient amount because he is shown to be in school on the Enterprise, being an intern in engineering and on the bridge, and eventually attending Starfleet Academy. So there is some training going on, but it doesn't fully explain his supreme intelligence. So for me, I'll give him some of this one. In total, I think Wesley is at a 1.75 out of 3 for ingredients. Now let's talk about Micheal Burnham. For the first ingredient, I think this one is a bit tricky as well, in that the writers were careful not to overload her character with too much of one version of the Sue shredouts. Instead, she's a combination of all the different versions into one. And some of you might say that this means she has layers to her character and that I shouldn't be including this ingredient at all, I would argue that she actually has more in line with Lieutenant Mary Sue from the 1973 short story, even going as far as to have the conflicted past that had her being raised as a Vulcan. There is a lot of parallels between Michael and Lieutenant Sue, so for me, I'm going to give this one a full check. It might appear as though that the second ingredient is going to be tricky because it's a well-documented thing that Discovery is supposed to focus on Michael's character, so of course the story is going to center around her. But to me, this is a cop-out answer. Again, look at Wonder Woman. She's the main character, and yet doesn't have this key ingredient added into the story. Michael, on the other hand, is the main character and the linchpin in everything going on in Discovery. She caused the Klingon War. She was Lorca's secret love interest in the Mirror Universe. She was the only person who could get close to Empress Georgiou. She ended the Klingon War. She has a special bond with Sarek. She is Spock's older sister. She helped save Spock's mind. Her mother is a time traveler that also happened to build a time suit that only she could pilot and save the universe. All of these things and much more happened to a single person in less than a 2-year span of time. And without her there, everything would fall apart. This isn't being a main character. It's being the center of the universe. The final ingredient, which involves earning or training the skills shown off to the audience, is somewhat tricky as well. We are shown that Michael's parents were very intelligent. She grew up on Vulcan and received their extremely effective education programs and attended the Vulcan Science Academy. She definitely has earned the right to be very intelligent on the show, in my opinion. However, she's also an extremely skilled pilot, engineer, and fighter. Overall, I will give Michael some of this ingredient into her souffle, but not all. I think in total, Michael comes in at 2.5 out of 3 for ingredients. This rating is where my yes kind of label comes from. It's also important to note that Michael Burnham's character isn't really comparable to Wesley Crusher. I simply did it in this video since that is what a lot of people use as a counterpoint when debating this topic. Wesley Crusher is a secondary character on an ensemble show. Michael Burnham is the main character on a single character-centric show. And she was set up to fail from the start, because not only do you have all of the ingredients I listed previously, but you also have to factor in people's negative reaction to the show overall, the tonal shift from previous Star Trek shows, and the switch from an ensemble cast to a central character who isn't the captain. All of these things just pile into the negativity of Michael's character. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the sexism aspect of the Sue character. There is a disproportionate level of shame and anger levied against female characters with Sue-like attributes as opposed to male characters who oftentimes get overlooked. I believe this to be 100% true. Is it also true that there are racist and sexist within the Michael Burnham is a Mary Sue camp? Yes. Is it true that all of the people who are in that camp are racist and sexist? No. That's a blanket statement and an unfair way of trying to dismiss criticism. Is it also fair to say that every character who fits into some of the guidelines I mentioned previously is a Mary Sue? No. Not every strong woman is a Mary Sue. And anyone using that as a blanket statement is also being unfair and borderline offensive. Also, guess what? There's no harm in admitting a character is a Sue and just enjoying the content anyways. In some cases, embracing it as part of the story and moving on is one of the best ways to consume the content the production team is trying to feed you. Just because you like a character that is identified as a Sue or has Sue-like qualities doesn't mean you are stupid or foolish. It means you like the character, and nobody gets to tell you otherwise because those are your preferences. You don't need to justify why you might enjoy watching them on screen or why you might not enjoy watching them on screen. It's all up to each of us to decide what characters keep us entertained and that what we identify with.